Hey folks, JodoCast again, and this time we're going to have a look at the Zombie Strike Sledgefire. This is how they're packaged, but who cares. That's what it looks like. Now it's an unusual sort of looking blaster, and it's a different setup in that it uses these like cartridge type scenarios that hold 3 darts. So you can have a look and see what sort of modifications we can make. It's a break barrel design, so you pull the little lever on the back here and the front barrel collapses. Now that's cocked. When it's not cocked and you break the barrel at the front, it doesn't really want to move, so you've got to actually ratchet it down, and that's your cocking mechanism. Then the little cartridge just installs in the back here, that way. And it clicks into place. Then you can close the barrel up. And it fires 3 darts simultaneously. So I don't know how well this is going to go over the chronometer, but we'll bring in the chronometer and give it a shot and see if it does work. Right, the first lot of 3, the second lot of 3, and the third lot of 3. Alright, so now I'll put on screen what the average is. Alright, so now we've got our average. We'll set about pulling this apart and having a look and seeing what sort of modifications we can make. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is give you guys a little bit more detail with the mods that I'm doing and show you a little bit more about what I'm actually doing, the processes that I'm going through, make it a little bit more comprehensive for you. Now what I've done basically is gone around and undone all the screws around the outside of the body here. So I believe that is all that's necessary to get this body to come apart. So, yeah, look, oh, wow, okay, that was easy. That was very easy. So there you go, so that's the body come apart. Now you can remove the stock at this point, and then you can choose to either put that back in or leave it out, or modify it so that it's a clip-in, clip-out type system, which I may have a look at actually. I might see if I can do that. Now, here's the basics of the blaster. You've got your hammer up the top there, which is actually just your release mechanism for your barrel, so that your barrel can break. Your pivot for your cocking mechanism, which actually pushes a fixed point lever back, so it actually pushes your spring back and locks it into place for the cocking. And it's pretty straightforward. So what I might do is we'll have a look at the cocking mechanism in it and what have you, and see how hard it is to actually compress that spring, etc. And maybe see if we've got something in the box of bits that may improve the compression of that spring, or maybe something a little bit stiffer spring or something. So, but first of all, I might pull this section out here. We'll have a look at the main piston part of it and the cylinder, etc. Check the O-ring seal, all those type of things, and I'll show you those as I'm doing them. But there's a basic overview of the internals of the blaster at this point. Back in one sec. Okay, now a brief overview of the internals and how it all functions. There is a very basic little trigger mechanism. It's just got the tiniest of little return springs underneath it, which basically just latches under the bottom edge here and pushes it back in the opposite direction. It just has that little pivot point that sits into the little hole there, other side of the spring. So essentially you just stick it in on a reasonable sort of angle. You can see that little spring just latches under that little front edge of it, and essentially as the trigger pivots, it just puts some opposing force to push it back the opposite direction. Get this into focus again. Yeah, it just puts some opposing force to push it back the opposite direction into its resting point. Okay. Now, the lever, as you break the barrel down, this rotates and pushes this arm back, which this vertical arm here, or near vertical arm here, has a fixed pivot point at the bottom. So as you break the barrel and cock it back, you can actually see that move. Let me see if I can demonstrate it for you. Just crack the barrel. Okay, so you'll see as the barrel comes down and it starts to lever, you can see that, for one, this little tooth section at the back here ratchets into what essentially is your trigger catch, that little orange piece there that's wiggling there, which your trigger, when you push it, pull your trigger back, just pushes that back and releases the arm so it can return under the spring pressure. As you can see, the spring's actually not terribly compressed. Even once it's cocked, there's still probably 3/4 of an inch of additional compression that can be done. So I'm thinking I might play with that, might try and actually just put some additional compression in the spring rather than replacing the spring. Not 100% sure, because that spring is pretty beefy. It's actually got quite a bit of power in it. Yeah, okay, so as this arm goes back, as the barrel breaks down, you can see it's pulling the plunger rod backwards. As that arm pushes that arm backwards, you can see the motion of it there. And you can see it also releases this trigger catch, or trigger lock, pushes it in underneath the activation edge of the trigger, so it essentially becomes a trigger lock. So while the barrel is open, you cannot pull your trigger. Then once you close your barrel, that returns back out of the way so that you can then engage your trigger. So it's fairly basic. The lever at the back here is basically just operates a like a two little jaw system which releases the barrel, which actually you can lift out. Which just lifts out, and essentially just as you cock it, it pulls those little teeth in on the sides there, which are engaged into that little recess there. So it releases the barrel, so the barrel can break down. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Nothing amazing, no amazing engineering in that. Okay, so once you've got the barrel broken down out of the way, I'm actually going to take this barrel apart as well. I'm going to take it off at this hinge so we can get right into it. So I'll come back and I'll show you that once I've taken that apart as well. Okay, so once you open this front barrel section as well, there's a little lock mechanism there, which that's actually sitting out. That should be in that little hole. Or is it in that hole? Oh, okay, it is in that hole. It's got a bit of an extension to it. So there's a little spring-loaded peg there, which is the latch that holds your actual in place, your cartridge. Holds your cartridge in place. Okay, so that's your spring-loaded eject for your cartridge. So nothing spectacular there. You can probably put a little bit more tension on that spring if you wanted to, so that it actually flicks your cartridges out a little better. But don't know if it's worthwhile or not. I may have a look at that later, but first things first, I wanted to just free up this mechanism here so that I can lift it out completely, and then I can actually slide it free of the gun, free of the blaster, blaster, and can have a look at it separately. Alright, let's have a look at this front piston section here and see how we go about removing it. No doubt all these bits are going to fall out as soon as I start to play with one of them, so I may as well pull them out, so at least I have some control over what's going where. Alright, trigger, come here trigger, catch spring, slipped off. Okay, I'll pull all these aside as well, and yeah, there's a little locator notch on the back here, just there, that just needs to be clipped out, and you should in theory be able to slide that out, so let's see if that is the case. So in theory, if you put a little bit of lateral pressure on that to pop that out of there, you should then be able to pull it forward. Oh well, super easy. We'll have a look at these air restrictors and see if they can be removed. There's a clip either side here of the cylinder, so we may be able to remove that front section, or it may be solvent welded. I'll have a look and I'll be back to you. Now this is awfully greasy. There's a fair bit of lubricant on this. This looks like it's had a bit of stress. Something's put some stress into it before now. Still got a very good seal though. Okay, we'll have a look at this piston head, see what we can do with it, as far as maybe fill in some of that void, some of that dead space at the front of it there, and seal up some of these little air venting sections. The slot on either side there, and the little hole in top, maybe fill them with a bit of hot glue, and I might put a like a pad or something in the middle there to try and take up some of that void of that dead space. And we'll have a look at the O-ring seal and see if we can improve the O-ring seal. The other thing I'm going to look at is maybe trying to put a bit of a maybe a hot glue buffer or something in at the top edge of the spring here to give the spring a little bit more compression. See if it works. Hopefully it does. Okay, now yeah, I've kind of gone and pulled the whole thing completely apart now. I should go back and explain that. I'll just show you this first and then I'll go back and explain it. The piston seal in, or the plunger head seal in this tube is phenomenal. Like, it is a great seal. Where these little vents are on the side, I'm just going to pop a little bit of hot glue in those up to the edge of where the O-ring sits, and in those little dots there, the little holes. And I picked up just this is actually just a kit of just different like little sticky pads that are designed for the bottom of furniture legs, etc. And there's one here that's, as you can see, it's just like a sort of medium density foam adhesive on one side, but it will fit in there perfectly once I've got the hot glue in there, and it will take up a fair bit of that dead space that's in the plunger head there without adding a heap of additional weight. So I'm just going to pop that in there as well, just after I've glued up the two sides. Alright, so I'll pop back and show you once I've... Okay, so I have... Get under the light. Filled the little holes either side with a bit of hot glue, and the slots on either side with some hot glue, and stuck that little adhesive pad in the middle there just to fill up a bit of the dead space. I also noticed there was a little notch out of the side there, so I've actually just moulded some hot glue into that as well, just to try and give it a complete seal, and it seals quite nicely in the piston now. So not going to do anything with the O-ring, not going to put anything under it or whatever, because it seals brilliantly as it is. What I ended up doing was actually getting my Dremel into the back of it and taking out that plate, which allowed them all just to drop straight out. Now I've left a little bit of material at the edge of where each of the 3 points were contacted, which will hopefully give a bit of a buffer against that, against the plunger head. I've been working with some ABS plastic for another job that I've been doing. So what I've done is I've made, like, as you can see, a little square plate to go around the compression rod that the spring slides up. And what I'm going to do now is put a hot glue buffer between that plate and the top of this T here to hold that plate in position, so when the spring comes up from the bottom and presses against it, it holds that little bit of extra pressure on the spring instead of the spring going right up to that end. I'm just going to space it out a bit just to put a little bit of extra tension on the spring once it's in its fully cocked position. Alright, I'm not going to go crazy. Look, I worked out that you can probably get another 3/4 of an inch, so probably that, but I'm not going to go too far on it. I probably reckon I'll probably go 10 mil, probably just give it a little extra 10 mil of compression and see if that makes any difference. And then what I'll do is, once the spring's on there, I'll trim that square to the same diameter as the spring, or just slightly larger than the spring, obviously, for the spring to seat up against it properly. Alright, I'll show you that once it's done as well. Okay, now, here's what I've done. As you can see, I've put in a hot glue buffer in between where the spring used to seat at the top of that T there, and that comes back to an ABS plastic plate that the spring now seats onto. So it's just put a little bit more tension in this spring as it sits in there now, so it's actually quite taut. It's got a little bit of tension on it as we speak. Got the lock mechanism back in, which I think is correct. I'm hoping it's correct. Now I'll go about putting the trigger mechanism, etc. back in. Okay, so I've got the bits back in now, ready to put the lid back on. Everything's back in place, just needs to be a fine adjustment. Now the only thing I did do is I removed this piece out of the back because I cannot see for the life of me what purpose it serves. So I've removed it, and hopefully it's not essential, but I guess we'll find out. Alright, I'll put the lid back on now, and we'll put the blaster back together, and we will give it a test fire and put it over the chronometer and see if we've been able to make any gains with it. Alright, I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so here we are with Sledgefire all done. I did do one additional mod, which was to take out the bars across the back of the cartridges, so that there's nothing obstructing the airflow from the cylinders straight into the back of the darts. Now the other thing I did do was I did Dremel out the material around the sides of this, so in theory it should be detachable. What we'll do now is we'll set up the chronometer and put 6 cartridges of 3 across the chronometer and see what sort of a reading we get. So we'll set up the okay. It's a little bit stiffer to cock. It actually feels smoother and more solid, which is unusual, but it's the way it works. Alright, we'll put the first lot of 3 over the chronometer now. May not be giving a terribly accurate reading. Alright, so there we go. The Zombie Strike Sledgefire, now in pistol grip, which I like. Well, they hit with a bit of pace. So okay, so even if the FPS reading isn't astronomical and compared with some of the other blasters that I've done, it still seems to hit really quite well. I think it's got a bit more oomph than the rough cut. and at least this fires 3 at a time instead of 2 at a time. And they still seem to be grouping quite tightly too, as you probably saw from that shot. Alright folks, well thanks for watching, and please feel free to subscribe, and if there's any particular requests, if there's any blasters that you want to have a look at or you want me to do mods on, etc., by all means leave some comments and I'll have a look into them and see if I can accommodate. I know some blasters are slow coming out here in Australia in comparison to the States, so I do tend to be a little bit behind with my mods and guides, etc., because of that fact. But hey, I do the best I can. I even import some blasters just so that I can get them a bit earlier. But by all means, let me know, and I'll leave some comments if you like, and I'll endeavour to have a look at whatever you would like to see modded. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Just a little postscript add-on to the blaster. I have taken some of the material off the back of this now, so now it actually does. By pulling it off as well. So obviously it takes a little bit of effort to get it on and off. Let's see if I can actually get this in one-handed. Yeah, that worked well. There we go. And it snaps in. Alright folks, there we go. And thanks for watching. Cheers.